Hello and most welcome to 1635 of the Heidegger series. We will today continue with chapter 7 of Paul Johnston's Rethinking the Inner. Chapter is called The Mind, the Brain and the Soul. And I will continue where I left off in 1632. And we've been talking about the clock and how it's often regarded that we have an internal clock, biological clock that we use to tell the time. But the reason for us more or less accurately being able to guess time could rather be that we developed the ability, that there is nothing internal. It's rather similar to all the other capabilities we have, as seeing, understanding, sensing, perceiving. That makes the clock-knowing tendency much less inner and hidden. And here Paul Johnston is also looking into the prevalent, constant search for a scientific causal explanation. And he suggests, as Wittgenstein, that this search could lead us astray in the understanding. We end up, of course, in the understanding. We so to speak, break the rules of the language game by so doing. We're not following the ordinary ways of doing these things the correct way. This is a quote from page 214, a bit down on the page. One reason for we constantly go into the brain. One reason is the assumption that there must be a causal explanation for everything. And yet, the basis of this assumption needs careful investigation, for it is by no means clear that the demand for explanation is always appropriate. Excuse me. And here the clock is a rather good example that it's not enough that we are able to tell the time. It must be something hidden that causes everything. An original reason behind it all. Page 215, rather high up. In fact, guessing the time does not necessarily involve imagining a clock, still as looking at one. And there is certainly no such thing as glancing at one's inner clock and accidentally misread it. Maybe it's too dark inside of the head and the digits inside the head are not fluorescent, so you can see them inside the darkness. Bit like my own clock. So you see that tendency is similar in mistake or degree of mistake as assuming an inner perception or an inner thinking in the form of inner speech or imagery. And one of the more demanding understandings is that the force that we feel today, especially to think of scientific explanations as necessary for understanding fully what's happening, is similar to the search for the innerness of everything, where it commences, where it originates from the very outset. Consciousness is also somewhat similar, I would say. Consciousness is sort of the innerness of everything else that we feel, perceive, do, think, understand, and as sort of a cause or rather observer of all this, which is, according to Johnston, Wittgenstein, more than enough. There should be another factor. Consciousness in itself. that sort of, well, reads off in opposition to the clock. The consciousness reads off the perception dates. The perception data, the datum of perception, which is one of the things that leads to the misunderstanding of an inner perceiver. Often this paradox gets the term the homunculus misunderstanding. A little man that lives inside our skulls and sees and perceives everything, that is perception, emotions, feelings, intentions, or I often say that consciousness is the intention behind it all. Some extra additive that makes it working to the fullest. These things leads understanding gravely astray. They are very troublesome. And in the case of consciousness, the innerness is the brain, where it starts. The brain makes it all function from the beginning. The seat of this consciousness that doesn't make any sense in the language game. It is just there, not participating in the outerness. Very hard to see what purpose consciousness would have. For what reason it came about. Doesn't really seem to participate in any way whatsoever. If we dissolve consciousness, understand how the misunderstanding came about, its reasons or its particular feel. Many philosophical problems dissolves at the same time. There's no longer any need for a Cartesian res cogitans, and also the brain in the vat slowly deconstruct itself. Another problem I've been battling since my studies in philosophy in the 90s is the so-called get-year problem. Where you see smoke from a distance and you assume that there is a fire going on. In your own house, you get to your house and you understand that the smoke that you saw was coming from someone burning leaves, but your house is on fire anyway. So the smoke that you saw is not the cause of your knowledge. This problem is also sort of produced by the same confusion. This want for an ulterior reason for an understanding. In this case, the true smoke is what deludes us, makes us thinking weird, unaccustomed manners. Once we starting to heal that tendency, when understanding of the true working of the language game, there is a liberation, and I would say a deepening in understanding. And this is how we always play these language games. And we get to understand our own world better. That also including ourselves. one person wrote about Wittgenstein and called it the therapeutical method. I think that could actually be a bit misleading as well. Being shown out of this particular confusion is a unique thing done only by Wittgenstein and not really comparable to, as far as I know, to be pressed to anything I ever encountered before. Doesn't resemble anything else. And of course this was once upon a time also absolutely new to Wittgenstein himself. Something that he maybe had an insight about, but also worked a great deal about for at least decades. Most probably from the beginning, not even knowing that there was a problem going on, but having hints here and there. Hints that similar maybe to the hints coming in the late 19th century from physics. For example, the Morrison-Morley experiment of 1887, where they discovered that the velocity of light is constant. It does not change. And then we have the ultraviolet disaster or catastrophe, and more things accumulated. Possibly it could have been similar for Wittgenstein. Let's see if I can find some more outtakes. When this book was written in 1990, in the 1990s, it was published 1993, Johnston writes that it had become common to say that my brain hurts or my brain is tired. I would say this 30 years later to the year, this has become even more common. The expression itself could be completely harmless, but there is a risk that it leads thinking or understanding completely astray. To start thinking that the brain is literally hurting or exhausted. This is so common today. We have brain tiredness, brain fog, tired brains, overactive brains, and these brains are, so to speak, apart from the details of the language game. They are apart from perception, all the different emotional words, anger, joy, happiness, nostalgia. It's different from intention, knowledge, insight. The brain is the storage for all these. It is where these things reside or where they stem from. The true originator, or there could be other expressions for this, quite divergent. The heart problem, as David Chalmers today calls, is today one of the most possessing questions in philosophy, biology, neurology, psychotherapy, psychology, and of course much more. Wittgenstein, Johnston dissolves the problem completely. It ceases to be a problem. It is not that the hard problem gets an answer. It is that David Chalmers' question was based on confusing thinking, confused thinking. Mistaken beliefs, rather like looking for an animal that looks like a mixture of eagle and hare, a mythological animal in my home country. That quest for finding that odd animal would never end in success. The quest is, so to speak, badly formulated or misarranged from the beginning. The only solution is to go back to where it started. Here is a pretty amazing quote. The statement "man thinks" is not a description of a chance attribute of man. Rather, the concept of thinking and the concept of a normal human being are internally related. And another hint is beyond the quote on the same page. Our psychological concepts are concepts we use in our interaction with each other, and they are not definable independently of that. If we say that animals think, we point to a similarity between their actions and our own, rather than describe a phenomenon which has various types of manifestation. It's a huge difference there. And psychology can name these tendencies like separable, that things that are possible to separate from the rest. But truly, that is not a possible thing. In a way, no matter how inner something can feel, how hidden within its one's insidedness of insidedness, it will still participate in the outside. Otherwise, it would never have sprung into existence, and its use would not make any sense whatsoever. Let me get back to the tennis game of page 203, where there are 3 suggestions. Oh, sorry, just when I am into it. Where there are 3 suggestions of this inner move in the tennis. Or for instance, one person compares the inner move to a move in ordinary sense, a bit like Descartes maybe. Another stresses the differences and rejects the comparison. There are only really external moves. While the third compares it to an action which happens in secret and which no one but the agent herself knows. The inner move is an X. The last one is the most common, I would say. There are only external moves compared somewhat to Skinnerian behaviorism. And the first one is an oddity rather, but I think it still exists in some people. All these varieties gets dissolved. But nothing comes to harm, and I think this is a good point. Until we are not misled and that we always see the dangers of the expression inner move of the game. That's dangerous because it produces confusion. Until then, we so to speak, go scot-free. became more of a summary, I say thank you very much, and I will continue with the reading in 16. What number it will be? 16. 37 or 38. Bye bye for now, and thank you.